when Kathy come up with the title, Infinitely Know Thyself, I remember years ago the phrase from Francis Frangipane, I can never know the heart of God till I can discern my own heart. And I thought of that quote. And I wrote this right after, do you know you? Sounds like an odd question. It's even odder when you consider that most people believe certain things about themselves. What happens when we consider beyond belief into knowing? This is even rare when you hear the self you need to know is the infinite self. And I thought of something Danny Kelly said, how in the Psalms, David said, I know this about God, regardless of what transition he was in. This is not intellectual gymnastics, the trivia head knowledge, the fast pace of gaining information. You can't look up your name on Wikipedia and find out who you are. One of the Greek words translated know is the word gnosko. It doesn't mean to gather information. It means to infinitely know, to look beyond. It's a Jewish idiom for Adam knew his wife. How do you know yourself? This knowing is God is love. Love is more than the foundation. It is the essence and fiber of your very being. God's love is beyond your concepts of love. Today I'm asking you to not, in any sense of the word, give anything up, because the faith of Christ that you have in your experiences, no one can take that from you. And we know that in daily life and ministry, people go to church a lot of times because they are desperate. And we even know that there are people out here that are so hungry that we see as we go to Starbucks and throughout the day, or maybe somebody you pass in the hall that really needs to hear the truth that you have in your being. But we ask you to take this time for a journey into etymology. Come and join us in the exploration of the mysteries of mysteries. I am not a theologian. I do study theology. I am not a historian. I'm a linguistic. I'm a student of words. Words and definitions have evolved. I'm asking you to take a new look at certain words, to have the courage to look at them from different angles. I'm not asking you to become a theologian, but to look at different ways that people see things and research and understand and have different views. I said at this place right here, when we had the War and Peace Conference, that I was no longer trying to make the old and new covenant line up because I could not do it in my own power. Understand that the old covenant is your vow to God. The new covenant is God's vow to you. And there's a lot of things that we have vowed to God that are beautiful and pretty, and I think we should be more dedicated than ever before. We understand when the buck stops with us, there's something God wants to do. And so as a historian of words, I can go back and look at different words and see them. One of the words that you hear is the word myth. The word myth in your English definition means something that is not true. Okay? However, when you look at the Greek word mythos, it's something totally different. It's a story that's been told over and over and over. Is it a true story? Is it factual? No. But there's a reality in it that transcends everything. Whether you know it or not, polar bears don't drink Coca-Cola. Okay? But there's a story in that. And so in the ancient world, they sat around campfires just like many of us may have grew up and heard stories. I remember when Jesus walked to the blind man said, God hears the prayers of sinners. Do you know that statement is not true? God does not hear the prayer of sinners, He hears the cry. Because when you really have true prayer, there is no sin. Because it's communion. And so we're going to talk about things, because I think the Bible, and I tell you, I'm not here in any way to degrade the Bible. I'm telling you that in my life, I have found that this is the most amazingly designed book I have ever seen in my life. And there is truths and realities in it that keep me up at night and that dig. But I will tell you, there are times when it recorded what they thought. And I think that's so beautiful. You know, I do all things through Christ which strengthens me. We quote that, but in the Greek it says, I do all things through Christ which strengthens me. In other words, there's a point of discovery, and it records man's thinking. It records the ancient stories. And it also records the mystical. And people get freaked out about that word. Mystical is only an old word for prophetic. It means you're hearing God beyond your senses. But 2 or 3 years ago, I struggled being a student of words, and I struggled being charismatic. Because I would go into theological places and I'd hear like the word mythos or the word logos, and I'd look up these definitions, and then I would come into the modern world, and everybody told me, well, Mark, the logos is just this printed page. Listen, it's way beyond that. So I'm asking you to go with us, to go on a journey, and part of this is what is called mimetic realism. Some of y'all may have heard me that. It's the theology of Rene Girard. I'm not saying that it is the answer to everything, but it's some things we're going to look at. It's some things that we're going to see, and I'm going to be honest with you. Even people outside the church walls are beginning to realize the depth that is in this Bible. And yet we still have people who would rather argue than see love in it. A love that we can't explain. And I tell you, I grew up, some of y'all know me, I wanted everything dotted and T'd, but there's a paradox to love, which means love will trump what you can't understand. And understand we are coming for that. When we define these things, we're not telling any of you, baby, this is what you need to believe. This is what you need to think. No, we're just offering you things to think about. If you have a problem with it or you don't like it, that's fine. Dismiss it. It won't offend me a bit. Because I'm moving into more and more stuff. And there's things going to say this afternoon I would have never said years ago. Because I was so biased and prejudiced. And even some words like law. I hated that word. But I see it in a different light now. Well, at this time, I'm going to ask for Sandra Kelly to come and pray and flow a little bit. And then we're going to have Mike come and explain all this. But I just ask you today, understand we are defining words. Well, how does that work out in theology? Don't have a clue. That's why we're together. But this is not just us as speakers. We want to talk to you. We want to get revelation. We want to see what you're seeing. Sandra Kelly.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning. All of you beautiful people. Yes. I'm honored to be here. It's by God's grace that I'm here and that you're here. And I just want to take us into a place. It says, infinitely know thyself. And in order to do that, you got to know who the Creator is, and is to come. So, in saying that, let's just get our hearts and our minds in one mind and one accord. Yes. Holy Spirit, I just thank you. Just thank you, I thank you for the work that's already been done. I thank you for what you're going to do in this place today, in the hearts of each individual in this place, and those, Father God, that are beyond these walls. Father, I thank you that your Spirit has no boundaries. It knows no distance. It's always been. And Lord, and I ask that your living word come forth today through each and every individual, each and every heart. I thank you for your Son that you sent on our behalf to walk this earth and complete the work. Now, Lord, I ask that each and every individual has a part to play in this, whether they say something or not. I ask that you just move again, and I thank you. Thank you, I thank you for your finished work and the depths of that finished work that resounds on the inside of us and comes forth and does not return void. Thank you, Lord. We just wait upon you in this place. You're here. Increase increase. And Lord, open the understanding of our hearts and of our minds, Father, so they can be on one accord. Thank you for your love, because that's who you are. If you don't know love, you don't know Him. And I thank you, Lord, for establishing these things upon our hearts in this place and your people. In Jesus' name, amen. Oh, I'm going to introduce Mike. I want to introduce Mike Clegg. I've known him for a little while. I don't get to visit with him a whole lot. But every time we do get together, him and his wife Beth, it's always wonderful. Yes. I enjoy their presence. I love being in their presence. We visited last night, and I just want them to know what a blessing they are. As I introduce him, I know he's got things that are deep on the inside of him that's going to come out. And we're going to go into a different place in this moment. So, Mike Clegg.
Same brother.
I'm in front of the camera.
Way up there.
You know, in this conference, we talked about etymologies and word changes and understanding the pattern and meaning of words, and that has fascinated me, and I understand that we may have different thoughts, different concepts, and to me, that is what's exciting. Because some of these things that I want to show you today, I went back.
You have a microphone.
I can't hold my iPad. I went back and pulled some of these thoughts, and I was amazed. And what I enjoy doing is pulling them through the hundreds of years back to now. Because sometimes when we say a word, you know, a word etymology is a comparison of a word, but a lot of times when we look at a word, we forget what it meant when it may have been first thought or conceived. One of our words, cool, you know, we think the traditional meaning is a temperature that's, the Old English Dictionary says a temperature that is not hot, but warmer than cold. But if we look at it now, if I tell you that, well, Mark and I had a very difficult argument yesterday, and I said, we're cool now. That means we don't have conflict. If I looked at Danny's car and I said, that's a cool car, that means it's interesting, different. So see, the word cool has a whole different meaning than a temperature variant. The word pitch, if you're a contractor, you know the pitch of a roof. If you're a softball player, that's what is first thrown across home plate. If you're a car salesman, you have a sales pitch. All of these words is one word, present. Well, are you here? Are you getting me a gift? You know, we have so many words that in our English language have different thoughts and different concepts. But sometimes we don't see that that is possible in our Bibles. One of the words that I want to look at is logos. The title of this presentation is Deciphering the Logos Enigma. It has brought fascination to me to see what logos, what we think it is now, to what it has been and was before time, and even in other civilizations. We're going to see it that it was in Egypt, that it was in China, and they had concepts for this word. The Chinese called it Tao. Egyptian calls it Mayat. All of these words add to what our current understanding of logos is. Kaplan International is a place on the website. They produce infographics. What they did, I know this is hard to see, but they took the top 10 English words that have varied definitions. The word run, and on the graphic, you can't see it, but they're in different colors, and it marks it as a verb, adjective, and noun. The word run has 179 different meanings. The word take has 127. The word play has 95. So the top 10 words have over 1,141 different meanings. But we have narrowed it down, and we think the word read, R-E-A-D, that is past tense, and it is, I have read the book, I I am reading the book, spelled the same way. So because of the way the word is used is how we determine the tense of that word. The thing that's got me interested when I was looking at this is the word myth. Like I said, how can we not think that it is possible that sometimes when the words were used in our Bible and it went through all the translations that it did, that the words were diluted or mistranslated, or concepts that were intended did not follow through and flow down through the word, through the use of the word. The word myth has also undergone change. Like Mark said, if we say myth in our modern language, we think it's a fantasy or a lie. One of the things about myth is it must be related to the sacred. If it is not related to the sacred, then it is not considered mythical. If I ask you about George Washington and the cherry tree, you know, his dad gave him an axe when he was 6 years old, and he went out and chopped down his dad's favorite cherry tree. His dad asked him, and he says, "I cannot tell a lie. I did cut it down with my hatchet." His father was so pleased that he did not lie, that he told him that his truth, or his desire to be truthful, made him more proud than 1,000 cherry trees. If you look that up in the dictionaries in our history, that is under the word myth. That story is made up by his contemporaries to show how truthful he really was. It never really occurred in history. But if we look at actually that type of story, it has nothing to do with the religious or sacred aspect, so it's not a myth, but it's a folktale. It goes along with Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone. Another example is Hercules. Hercules is not tied to the sacred, so it's not a myth, but it has a superhero power, so it's a legend. Hercules and the 12 labors, the things that he supposedly did to please another god. The other aspect is the stories that we say once upon a time, a fairy tale. It's about imaginary land, an imaginary place, and imaginary people. Snow White is a German fairy tale in 1823. So a myth is tied to the sacred, but it has multiple layers. It goes very deeply. Sometimes it'll come to the top. Sometimes it might be emotional. Sometimes it might be funny. But it does tell a story that we have to look at and see below words. We have to see the intent of the story. The word mythos is the Greek word for myth. It means narrative or fact. The original word meant something of a truthful nature. It did not mean necessarily literal, but it did mean factual. And that word was linked to our word, the word we understand as logos, because logos means a speech or a quote or an oration. So when we look at the word myth, a lot of times as it went through the Greek aspects and it mingled with their art and their culture, their literature, their drama, the plays that they have, the truthful element dropped out of it. So, and it was written, or myths were translated during their culture and time. If I tell a story, the George Washington story, that happened in our early culture, and you would have to know in a rural setting what a hatchet is. If that was used in a larger city, they may not know what the word meant. So it all has to do with culture, with tradition, with time, and everything that was situated around the story. Before I started this study, and some years back, I would think that the words, or the concepts of religion and the concepts of myth were antithetical. I thought that they could not be used in the same concept, but I got to begin to see that religion is full of myth. Not our traditional statement of untruths, but our statement of facts that a man is trying to explain what he really cannot explain. He's trying to make sense of another world, of another concept, of someone higher than himself, and he has to do it in his traditions, cultures, and in his time frame. And something that was written in 100 AD, and we try to pull that story to us, if we don't have the concepts or the ideologies that they had, we can't fully understand what it meant. And a lot of times we do that with our Bible. Like I said, one of the main words that I want to look at a little later is logos. That word is powerful, and it has meant a huge, tremendous change in my concept of logos. John A.T. Robertson says, well, if we look, sometimes if we consider our Bibles to be mythical, we take that as an offense. But it's really not. It's saying that that book is loaded with such depth and such intrigue and such mystery that you could spend a lifetime digging through it and coming and increasing your knowledge of who our Father is. It helps me to understand John's concept of who he sees God to be. Because I can take what he says and what he understands, I can add that to me. I don't want to distract it and say that's not right. I want to add what he says. I want to add what Mark says, what Danny says, what Carol says, because I want the fullest picture of who God is as possibly as I can get. So instead of saying, that's wrong, that's right, that's wrong, slow down a minute, look at it, and consider the possibilities. Look at the depths. Because of the people that we know, Carolyn is not going to mislead. John is not going to mislead. I'm not going to mislead, but the structures that we look at, the stories that we have, and our knowledge base and our understanding is all different. But I enjoy taking it and putting it together because I want the benefit of what you know and what you know and what you know who God is. I can add that to mine. Not distract it, not say it's wrong, and not take away, but increase it in mine. John A.T. Robinson, he said Christianity would be better served detaching myth from the doctrine of God. There's a Romanian writer that I started reading just about a couple of weeks ago. His name is Mircea Eliade. He said that we should never separate myth from religion. He said, myth is an essential foundation of religion, and that eliminating myth would eliminate a piece of the human psyche. He said it would destroy a piece of us if we tried to remove the mythical concept of God, of religion, of the structure of who we really are. Joseph Campbell said people could not fully understand their purpose without mythology to aid them. J.R. Tolkien, he combined his faith in myth when he marries mythology and the echo of divine truth. He was a good friend of C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis had a different concept of myth. He was very cynical. He says, after talking to Tolkien, he said, the Christ story is God's myth, while all other myths are man-made. There's a story that says on the evening of September 19, 1931, Tolkien and Lewis were talking together. And they were having a discussion, and Lewis says that he cannot understand how the meaning of Christ's life, death, and resurrection could affect him when it occurred thousands of years ago. Tolkien tells him that the gospel works the same way as the myth. Lewis had no problem understanding the movements of myths and legends, and he added the Gospels. He said the Gospels are lies breathed through silver. He's talking about the idea of the silver tongue. Someone who is silver tongued can make anything sound good, make anything sound truthful. So see, the cynicism was there. Tolkien replies that they are not completely lies, but one must realize myths have elements of truth within the distortions and unworthy outer husk they often wear. His concept was, he said, myth are echoes or memories of the truth that God had originally made known to Adam and Eve, the ancestors of the whole human race. And he says that they have deteriorated as the story is told and retold. So what is a myth? Is it untruth? Or is it man trying to understand and explain concepts that he has no familiarity with? Was Tolkien right? Are myths just simply echoes of our past, echoes of stories that God told Adam and Eve that have become mistranslated, misaligned, distrustful, and lies added in to make them sound well? I think the Bible is a collection of myths that portray a mystical reality, and that's the reason I put these meanings up here. Mythological means pertaining to a myth. It may reference a myth. It may have some aspect of a myth. A mythical is characteristic. It will include symbology, originalism, a paradox. A paradox is something that says, if I stand up here and say, I am lying, If I'm lying, I'm telling you the truth, and if I'm telling you the truth, I'm lying. It's something that goes in a circle that cannot be separated. It's something that revolves around itself that you could spend a mind-tangling days trying to figure out what is actually said. Mystical is something that becomes apparent in the spiritual realm without the senses. To me, that means it incites awe. And the best definition that I could find for awe is one I've used before. Awe is being face to face with reality, and it's realizing that there's no longer two. That is awe. So when I say the Bible is a collection of myths portraying mystical realities, I'm not denigrating the Bible. I'm not saying it's lies. I'm not saying it's untruth. I'm saying it's much, much deeper and has the potential to open up something about who we are, who God is, than what we first thought when we just read John 3:16 or we read Genesis 1. If we look deeper and see what other concepts are about the book. In the New Testament, for example, the cosmology of the New Testament is a three-tiered creation. It sees heaven above, it sees earth in the middle, and it sees an underworld. It says that the angels of God live in heaven, we live on earth, and the underworld is the place of torment and demons. And then it fully acknowledges that the earth aspect can be influenced by above and what's below, only in time. So the aspect of the earth is touched by the heavens and the underworld in time only. So should we remove the mythical element? Should we take the myth out of the Bible with the concept that if we remove everything that is mythical, that pertains to myth, that has to do with symbology, traditionalism, a paradox that's not logical, would we understand the Christ better? Would we understand the concept of what the gospel is trying to say better? We'll look at three options. One of them is by Rudolf Bultmann. The other one will be Karen Armstrong and Mircea Eliade. Bultmann says that to better understand who Christ is, we should demythologize the New Testament. He says we need to take out the things that pertain to mythology so we can see what the Gospels were trying to say. He says because the New Testament is written, or he says our redemptive terms and understanding is written with the views of classical antiquity, of so many years ago that it can't possibly mean anything for us like now. He takes the stance of C.S. Lewis. How can something that happened 1,000 years ago be good or be, how can it affect us now? So he says that can be better served if we take out what he considers the fraudulence, the extrapolations, the man-made stories, so we can get to the real gospel. On the outside of logic, that makes sense. But we got to remember that the Bible was written, inspired, it was written by men in their culture, in their time frame, in their thoughts, concepts, and things that they understood. Like the three-tiered earth. We know there's much more to it than that now. Science has said so. We know that the galaxies and the universe, it's completely, in size, it has no comparison to what they conceived at that time. So, for my definition of myth, for right now, myth is something that takes something of a historical aspect and makes it relevant to me. It may do it through words, concepts, pictures, stories, symbology, tradition, anything, but whatever it takes to get the meaning of the myth pertinent to me today. Bultmann's definition of myth, he says it depends if one considers all language about the acts of God to be decisively eschatological, or are they mythological? He's saying the things that happen, are they entombed in time and locked there, or are they able to flow through time? He says that the Orthodox rituals, to be correctly followed, one must find the first cause of the event, of the ritual. He said at the point if we go to the first cause of the crucifixion, if we find the original cause, the purpose of the crucifixion, and we omit all the stories that occurred after that, that we can see the true meaning of the ritual that occurred, and that, he says, transcend time. I think that the myth carries it through time. Sometimes we look at the cross and we say that happened 1,000 years ago, and we lock it to one man. The mythological aspect says it happened here, but its meaning does flow to me because I was there too. I was not born, but the same gospel tells me that I was there with him. That we experienced all of these things when they occurred in history. Mythology allows me to pull them to me today. That I can stand and say, I was there. But if we can stand and say, I was at the cross, we can also stand and say, I was there when God said, let there be. And then, I was there when he thought this process. The next option is I was there with him originally. Mythology allows us to go back to our origins. One example that I thought about with Rudolf Bultmann, when Jesus was talking about God and he acknowledged him as Father. You know, we've read that so many times and we understand that Jesus called God Father. But what we forget is that he was showing us that we can call God Father. We can call him Creator. We can call him all those aspects that the myths have told us that he is. René Girard, he was a French theologian and philosopher. He tried to find an explanation of the myth. He didn't want to remove it, but he wanted to find why it works then and why it works now. He was familiar with J.G. Fraser, who wrote The Golden Bough. And he says that all myth is ritual, being a religious ceremony in which prescribed series of actions are scrupulously observed is the doing, while myth is the saying. He said ritual is the doing, mythology or myth is the saying. So a myth describes a ritual. And like Bultmann pointed out, if we could go to the first call, to the first occurrence of the story of the myth, we can find the true meaning, the true reason. One of the examples is the Lord's Supper. He says, this do ye in remembrance of me until I come. And we do that in our church services and have, growing up, we partake the Lord's Supper. The wafer and the grape juice. And Catholicism teaches a transubstantiation, that it does actually change. So do they have a more reasonable thought of myth than what our Protestant aspects say? Because we doesn't say it changes, we believe it is a ritual and we apply it to us, but Catholicism says it actually changes and becomes the body and blood of Christ. So it's partook literally. In the mythical aspect, the first cause was a remembrance, but it's also a oneness. It puts us back in all the things that occurred, and all the things that occurred in the mythological aspect of the Gospels, we were there. Everything that the Christ experienced, we were there. Everything that God done, we were there because we were with him originally. So Girard paraphrases, he says, the world's myth do not reveal a way to interpret the Gospels. But he said it's exactly the reverse. He says the Gospels reveal a way for us to interpret myth. So he says that because of the way the gospel is written, that it looks upon Jesus as the Son of God, and it says that the Son of God was without fault when all the myths of the world occurred. When someone died, that aspect of that hero, he became a hero and was later deified. So he looks and says, as a myth, that they had a reason to kill the scapegoat. In the Gospels, Gerard says the scapegoat was without fault. That's the difference, and that's how he looks at myth and sees a different aspect. And that aspect is he calls it mimetic theory. He essentially says that mimetic. He essentially says that if Mark and I really like Kirby's camera, I do. So we have an agreement that we both like his camera. We're both going to go after that camera. As we set our eyes on that camera and we get closer, we're going to become rivals. We're going to become at odds against each other. I'm going to try to prevent him. He's going to try to prevent me. The people are watching. They said, oh, that must be something I really like. So y'all get involved and decide, I want Kirby's camera. So we all get together and we're going to look at Kirby. The only way we can get Kirby's camera is if we hurt Kirby. So we're going to go after Kirby. We're going to go after Kirby. And we're going to take Kirby's camera. But because me and Mark have focused on his camera and we have caused y'all to focus on his camera, all of us are going to get together and attack Kirby. So Kirby's going to die. And we're going to get his camera. But then when we tell the story, Kirby gave up his life so we could have his camera. That's mimetic theory. It says that the rivalry occurs, that the scapegoat dies, the mob turns it around and says the scapegoat died of a worthy cause. He looks at Peter. He says that Peter said he would never deny Jesus. But when it got rough, he fell to the angry crowd, the crowd, and he did deny it. So he went with the mimetic contagion. He went with the angry mob, the cause that stirred up. But Gerard says there's something that happens in the angry mob in the reason that the rest of y'all joined us. And he calls it misknowing. He said in misknowing, something happened in the psyche of the mob to say, those two are right, they deserve his camera and we're going to help. We see nothing wrong with it, their cause is righteous. John the Baptist, when Salome danced before the crowd, roused up the crowd, and they went after John the Baptist. They thought they did it justifiably. Not realizing that Herodias had it all planned, she controlled the aspect. The crowd took off and jumped in the fray, and John the Baptist was beheaded. This has happened throughout the gospel. Rene Girard says that when Kirby became the scapegoat, he did nothing wrong. So in the gospel, when Jesus became our scapegoat, he was not guilty. Mimesis with Rene Girard in mythology, the person is the scapegoat is always guilty and the guilt is past. In looking a little bit at myth and logos, logos is not mimetic. The logos concept does not copy and does not set up rivalry and does not go after the scapegoat. The scapegoat is not needed. Mimesis remembers the offense. Logos knows one does not exist. How? Okay. The third aspect of the myth is Karen Armstrong. Karen Armstrong says, the purpose of a myth is not to impart factual information, but is primarily to guide the behavior, and the truth of myth can only be seen if the ritual is put into practice ethically and morally. That's sort of what we do with our Lord's Supper. We do it in remembrance. It's something to show remembrance of. She says that when people became aware of their own mortality and they tried to give the stories meaning, they then tried to explain their relationship with something spiritual, something other than themselves. So as myth sought to copy the ritual moved to something more than a story. It became reality. One of the writers that I quoted before, R.J. Stewart, he says that anytime a myth is recounted, to the listener, it becomes alive and is actually a reenactment. So when we perform or when we take part in the Lord's Supper, we think that that is just a memory that something is happening. But according to mythology, his effects of what he did and what he died are brought up again and also applied to us. So anytime a ritual is performed, it is showing that what that story is telling actually occurred again. It brought it up into the present moment. Armstrong looked at myth and science. She said that science tends to simplify the concept of God, and myth causes a deeper construct. It allows a deeper cause. And in logic, cause and effect cannot explain why. And in most cases, first cause does not have a reason of why. Myths can entertain the why. For example, why did God say, "Let there be light"? Why did God put such power in the Logos? Myth can respond, but science is mute. Science can't explain those things, but because of our oneness, we can explore through mythology, through facts, through stories, through culture. We can explore what those things really meant. A myth is similar to a board game. If we sit down and start playing the game of life, there's 4 or 5 of us playing. We each have our, I don't remember what the pot that each one has, and the cars, and the little ornament that you have that goes around the game. As the game develops, we begin to learn more and more about each other. It's fun. There is going to be a winner. And Armstrong says that the whole meaning of the game is not revealed until you play. I got to thinking about that. A myth, if I picked up a myth, or a story about a myth, or anything that I consider mythological, and I read it, but I don't. When you read a book, when I read a book, I get in the book. I'm there. I'm taking part of whatever is happening in the book. The same way with myth. If you take part of what's in the myth, you're playing the game. You're going to become interacted in the story, and it's going to mean so much more. When you do the Bible that way, or any book that you read, if you take part in it and it becomes real to you, it's going to mean a whole lot more than reading it and trying to say, is it literal? Is it figurative? Does it really say what I think it means? Assume it doesn't. Assume it doesn't mean what you think it means. Read John chapter 1 again. And forget what you thought Logos meant. That's what we'll look at a little later. That what if Logos meant more than Jesus? What if it meant more than Word or Christ? Like I said, in Egypt it meant truth. It was Ma'od. In all of the mythologies, in Hebrew it was Torah. In Aramaic it was Memra, the voice. All of these words put together give us a huge, amazing picture of our Greek word Logos. We don't have an English word other than the word Jesus because that's who we attribute it to. But the Logos is so much more. It means the power that controls the universe. It means the flow of all living things. It means our heartbeat. It means our breath. It means the sun. It means the stars. Psalms 19 says the heavens and earth declare. They're saying something. That's Logos. It says in Luke, when it says, if the people don't praise him, the rocks are going to cry out. An inanimate object is going to speak. The trees clap their hands in psalms. The seas roar. They don't have a voice. That's mythology. In our Bible, in Job, the Leviathan, the Behemoth, those don't exist in our natural sciences. So we can't say that the Bible is false. We've got to read it as if we were there and see what they're seeing and understand what they're seeing. If I read of this to you, she lusted after her lovers whose genitals were like those of donkeys and whose emission was like that of horses. Is that in our Bible? Absolutely. Another case. It says that if two men are fighting and the wife goes up and tries to save her husband and she grabs the other man by the genitals, her hand should be cut off without pity. That's in our Bible.
That's what he said.
I would say, thank you, wife, for helping me. So a lot of these things. Which one?
Both.
Ezekiel 22. Let's see. Ezekiel 23:20. And the other one is Deuteronomy 25:11 through 12. One other one, in our New Testament, how did Judas die? One account said he was hung. One account says he fell headlong. Matthew 27 says he Judas cast down the pieces of silver in the temple. And went and hanged himself, and the chief priest bought them with the potter's field. In Acts it says, now this man Judas purchased a field with the reward of iniquity, falling headlong, he burst asunder in the midst. It says his guts fell out after he fell. Do we say that the Bible lied? No. It's perception. It's how they're telling the story. It's how they see something at the time. Does it really matter? No. All of these things, the mythical aspect. Another example is who bought the potter's field. Acts says it was the chief priest. Acts says it was a man who purchased the field, and Matthew says it was the chief priest. There's a lot of things that you can Google biblical contradictions. There are thousands of things that they show the Bible does not match. One of them is God, who indicted Samuel to count the fighting men of Israel. David. 2 Samuel it says God. In 1 Chronicles it says Satan. Does it matter? No, it's telling a story. It's telling something from their perspective. The Bible is full of, and there's other books that are full of aspects. And the next aspect is the structure of Virtue Iliade, of his myth. I want to stop there. 2 minutes, 0.
Yeah.
And just, as we go through today, remember that you might hear something different. You might hear something that you've never heard before. The verses that we looked at, they're there. Do they? And it's how we look at them. Is it a literal aspect? Is it trying to tell a story? Were they trying to make a point? That's exactly it. They were making a point. To you, Kathy?
Yeah.
Are you done now?
I'm done now.
Good.
Thank you.
Bear with me a moment. I was gonna do this. I was just informed that someone that we all know and love has passed on, and that was Ray Basil.
No.
And he was like my father. So, just wanted to remember him.
Yes,
And Avis.
yes, Father.
Thank you.
Send our love to
So just send her some positive energy and love and the family.
them. Yes,
Is-
yes,
So, yeah, I was just texting and informed that, so I know you have something to say. And you can introduce Marcus.
Wow, that's our traditional thinking about death has been at best a paradox. But when we really understand, and this is hard to hear now, that death is such an impartation, because people have this assumption that their anointing, their legacy, their destiny goes to heaven. It doesn't. They impart it into us. Not to say he is somewhere else. He's in the dimension. He is into a place, and I knew Ray, and if there's one thing that always was amazed is his confidence in the love of God. I don't care what your theology is. What is your confidence in the love of God? That you walk every day with that connection. And that was Ray. And he was such a father. And we want to honor him at this conference because of the legacy. I don't know if I know anyone that sat on the platforms of these great men and women of God, and then he'd go out in the middle of and work in a field, and he was just as anointed when he was working in the field as when he was on those platforms. Amazing. And we just think of them and lift them up. And
Yeah, they'd always have us sing, "You Are My Sunshine."
yes.
And dance.
What we are saying here today, and you listen to all this and say, well, what has this got to do with me? Understand that for most of you in this room, this is a love book. And what is in there is about love. You know, I could have told my wife, hey, give me a kiss. Hey, you know what? I'm giving you kisses for the last 25 years. Come on. I can give you the history every time. Does she want that? No, she wants a present, living relationship.
Exactly.
A present truth. And that's a verse that has always challenged me. Be established in the present truth. One translation that's reaching you. So this is a love book that was written to me. Yes, it was written to you. It was written to you. It was written to you. But it will never become powerful until it's written to you. That you see that union in every page of the book. So we're not in any way applying to say there's nothing to this. But you understand that these different paradigms that people have are not just paradigms. These people influence people every day that you walk into, particularly in this young generation who has internet and Wikipedia and can read all this stuff and understand if somebody comes to me and says, Mark, is it this or is it that? I can say it's a paradox because it's love and it's all going to work out. So I'm in no way, and I think it's good that you understand that this is the people that we're talking to. People say, Mark, we don't need to really share the depth of the Word of God to people. Oh yeah? Well, let me tell you something. This generation has more information than ever. And they go to church and they walk out with getting their needs met, but there is no depth.
Right.
Where do you think they're going to go? When you have this kind of information that people think, and I have heard people, oh, it's just a mere myth. If it's just a mere myth, you don't understand the power of myth. Because a myth is a story that's not in time. Go to the Middle East. The greatest parables is the greatest theology of the world. When you go to the Gospels, it's the greatest theology. The prodigal son is the greatest theology. It wasn't just ethical stories. The Old Testament wasn't just because God got ticked off and he was mad at people. There's truths. And people ask me, Mark, do you believe that everything in the Bible is historical? I say no. But do I believe it's inspired? Absolutely. Every single ink dot is. Because I can be inspired because inspired means in spirit. And guess what? The in spirit is in the book. It's within me. And I understand this because of what's within me. But yet at the same time, there's a truth and so many layers that will keep you up at night. And so I'm asking you today to understand that we live in a generation of information. But the greatest thing is to have a love that's not locked in time. And how that affects grace, how that affects law. I'm going to talk about law and how a lot of these theories got mixed in, and you're told at a Baptist church what a law is, and it has to do with a lot of this stuff because these are the people they listen to in their theological deals. Was it good? Was it bad? People said, Mark, is it this or is it that? Mark, are you Trinitarian or oneness? I say yes.
Absolutely.
And no. It's a paradox. Now, speaking of paradoxes and enigma, and I know John calls it a conundrum, there is a man that I'm about to introduce that has been a real help to me because I study words. I don't study ways of thinking. So Marquis has always been very helpful to help me think outside the box And people ask me, do you understand everything Marquis says? No. But I do understand that there's a lot of things that Marquis is looking at. And one thing he always talks about is engaging the imagination. I used to read this book with no well, I had imagination. It was about hellfire and brimstone, and God was mad at me. But to enjoy an imagination, that divine beauty, and this love. So without further ado, because I'm up next and I could talk all night, we're going to have Marcus come, and there again, we honor Ray Basil and the destiny and legacy. And man, what an impactful life. So we honor him today. That's it. Good to see you.
Do I have to hold this one?
Yes. So sorry.
With both hands.
All right. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's so good to be here and to see you, the shining faces. Is a type of limitedness. I am in this space, in this body, and I am not in yours. Until I speak, or until I smell, until I move past you, until some essence of me goes by your consciousness. This is when I fuse with your identity, so to speak, and I try to import myself into you. So the words that I speak, the words that you read, this is my intention to get into your heart space, to get into your mind, to con you, to win your soul. He that wins souls is wise. Soul, the seat of reason, the seat of emotion, or in that Jewish construct, it is the center of being. He that can win the way you think is wise. And so as I'm talking, and as I'm being me, I'm trying to find limitlessness in the expression of who you are. I am trying to import, in other words, I'm trying to be important. This is what's happening. And I love the language because the language is English. I only speak English. I speak English and I speak black.
Speak black.
And what'd you say?
I said speak black.
Speak.
No, we
All right, I can speak black a little bit too. I'm going to break some verbs. It's going to be on like chicken bone, and you know, all those. But I'm gonna have to take up too much time to speak black today. Some of you might get it, but maybe not.
Maybe.
But I'm required to speak white in this culture. I am. It's because it's acceptable. It's normal. It's a part of the pedagogy. It's a part of our academic structure. But I'm not here to talk about that much today, except for to talk about that I am here to try to be limitless. And even as I change my language and use these words and speak scriptures and quote them, I'm trying to find value somewhere. I'm trying to find my limitlessness. So what is this infinite self that is me? I'm born into the world. I don't remember when I'm born. I don't remember when I started. I just know that I did. I don't know when I'll end or if I will end. I can't prove that I ever will. Because even if I pass on or lose the use of this body, I'm not prepared in this moment to tell you exactly what that looks like. I have no promises for you. I have no faith to offer you in this regard. I can tell you that whatever meaning I create or whatever meaning I share, I'll have to share in a moment of consciousness and awareness and awakeness in that present experience. Nothing else perhaps may even matter. I do know that I was born, but I cannot recall every detail of my childhood. I cannot. There are some moments that in a twinkling of an eye, I am raptured into those moments, or I have a flashback or transposed, or maybe even juxtaposed into those moments. Sometimes I remember walking through my mother's beauty shop, maybe 3 or 4. It's a faint memory, and it may even be a useless memory. I don't remember talking to anyone. I don't remember what I ate that day. I don't remember what I was wearing. Maybe just to remind me that I existed in a moment prior to this one. But I don't need a memory necessarily to know that. Because as the moments pass, even now, I'm proving that I am continuing from something that was before. The human has the tendency to build memories in ways that we attach meaning to them. And sometimes these meanings become more important than others. We have this affect or this affection, especially with things holy and things religious and things romantic and things familial. We want to protect our space. We want to secure our life. And this is where our biggest problems hedge, is this idea that we have to continue something. And we want to continue things almost because we don't believe we are infinite. So we find ways to create sustenance, ways to sustain, and to keep things going. This is why we have families. We want to continue the legacy or build a legacy. It's why we fall in love and get married and join someone, because we are trying to create and forge this identity about ourselves. But I don't really remember much from my childhood. I spoke earlier about going to school and, changing classes. I don't remember every one of my teachers' names. I don't remember every classmate's name. Sometimes I'm 30 years past graduating from high school, and sometimes I see a high school classmate, and I'm thinking, I don't even know your name. And I knew their name years ago. As a performer, I travel all around, and sometimes people love my music or they love my conversation. And they'll say things like, hey, you remember me? And I'm thinking, please don't ask me that.
Give me a hint, a little bit.
Something, I say, and I'm honest now, I'm like, you gotta help me out. Where do I know you from? Because sometimes as a musician, and I've written songs, and people love what I've offered them. This ability to play and to get into their hearts, it's almost like I am romantically, I'm musing them, and I create a special moment for them. And like even now, every one of you are listening to me, but I'm not listening to all of you. So I'm creating a moment right now that is special for each of you in a different kind of way. I don't quite know how that feels for you. But if it's really meaningful, you may remember this moment and I may not. And if you ask me about it, I may disappoint you. I may disappoint your idea, and it may like, wow, I'm not as important, he didn't remember me. I'm not as valuable, she didn't remember my name. And sometimes in our relationships in life, in our love relationships, in our family relationships, we get lost in the finite because the infinite is just a bit too elusive. It's a bit too abstract. It's a bit too undependable. It makes us feel poor. It makes us feel like there's not enough. So conversely, the word infinite is supposed to add to us a type of wealth, but the way we process holding on, it tends to make us feel poor when people try to lift us into the realm of infinite possibility. Every moment is a brand new opportunity for unlimited possibilities. Every moment is. Your capacity to love is limitless. Your capacity to love is limitless. And when you're challenged to not believe this, you should love anyway. You can find that quote on my Facebook if you don't want to write it down, because it's worth writing. It's worth remembering. Because we are in each moment invited to love or tempted to fear.
Wow. That's good.
Could you say,
And, pardon me?
I was going to ask you to repeat that.
In each moment, we are invited to love or tempted to fear. So, We understand temptation. We understand the language of temptation. From this perspective, from I think in the room, we know that Satan appeared to Jesus on the mountain when he was fasting and tempted him. And each temptation was an offering to get him to see powerfulness, also simultaneously seeing a threat to power to some degree. If this is who you are, then do this. Prove it. Test it. Put something at risk. And the nature of divinity is to not accept risk as a viable possibility. The nature of God, the nature of love, does not entertain the idea that a threat is viable. This is a paradox. It's almost a contradiction to the way we live, the way we're taught in this world. Almost everything we know is designed to cause us to hoard something or bring something to ourselves, archive it, enshrine it, and keep it forever. You know, when Jesus was on the mountain of transfiguration, and the disciples there said, hey, let's make a monument unto this. And he said, and then the voice from heaven said, hey, shut up. Well, that's not what it said. That's my poetry. It said, this is my beloved son. Hear ye him. In other words, you're getting this all wrong. There's an idea that you have. You think this moment is special. You want to keep it. It's blown your mind. You're the only ones that got to see it. You want to make sure other people get to know about it. So enshrine it. Jesus would have done a miracle, committed a miracle, almost like he committed a crime. He committed a miracle, and he'd say, hey, don't tell anybody I did this. But the tendency is to do something spectacular, to remember it. And so we live in this moment, all of us in here live in a moment, and it's almost as though everything about our life only has meaning because of our memories.
Mm-hmm.
And it would probably challenge you to get rid of your memories. Imagine if you did not elect to make any memory special. How would you feel about your father? How would you feel about your mother? How would you feel about your child? How would you feel about your lover? How would you feel about yourself, your education? How would you feel about your bank account? Would you hold on to anything? Infinitely knowing yourself is asking us to venture into a place of the unknown. It's an honest acceptance that there is something about me that I do not know. And it's something about me that no experience I've had has afforded me the privilege to become aware of it yet. In other words, all of you are useless for this new discovery. Unless, of course, you are not. And the only way I can know that you're not is if by chance, because of you, I can experience something that I never knew before. Mm-hmm. And if I experience this with someone who is not you, are you able to say yes to this? Or must you obey the law of my identity, which means I require you to be who I think you are, always, in all moments? And this is the rub of relationship and the rub of conflict. It's why we kill and why we persecute. Now, to know exceeding abundantly above anything I could ask or think, according to the power that works within me, is something that a writer said years ago. That same writer is attributed to saying, the weapons I have in this life, the things I fight in this world with, they are not carnal. In other words, they are not They're not aspects of my ego. You would call it flesh man. They're not aspects of necessarily my learned behavior. This need to protect myself. But they're mighty through God. I'll have to defer to Mark to see which version of God Paul is using in that text. To the pulling down of strongholds. Casting down everything that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. Every vain imagination. Heard you mention the word. I wasn't going to use that scripture till you said something about imagination earlier. So it's your fault. And it's your fault. So we have imagination, and we have vain imagination. Vain imagination, and what Paul is saying in this word, the knowledge, the epigenosis, or this, anything that comes against my own understanding, my own intimate relationship with the divine. That's what that means. It was not an admonition to a group of people in Corinth. Not the 1 Corinthians, but the 2 Corinthians. I guess the ones that came second. It was, he said, pulling down the strongholds. These things that exalt themselves against my own experience. So Paul is acknowledging something here. He's acknowledging that I have personally an experience with the divine, an experience with truth, and my metric for life or for understanding what is real is being able to say no to things that do not match my experience with the divine. Not necessarily my learning with my teaching, but with my own personal conversation, my own personal interaction with things that are not threatened. And this is difficult for us. But if you look at the narrative, the Pauline narrative, the person, you see a man who is persecuting and killing people because he believes something is real, something is right, something is moral. He feels justified in ending a life. He feels justified in proving something to be endable, so to speak. I just made that word up.
That's a good one.
I'm speaking black now, I'm making up words. That's what we do, we make up words. And we can make up words too. He's riding, I was about to say he's driving, but he wasn't driving. Not then. He's riding down the road, on the road to Damascus, and he's blinded. And subsequent to this, he makes statements like this: forgetting those things which are behind, I count it all as dung. I pressed forward. Now just imagine, if you would, what would your life be if you could forget everything that was behind you? What terrifies you about that? What are you unwilling to walk away from? Now, don't just think theology, and don't just think church.
Memories.
I want you to dig deep. I want to go after something valuable. I want to go after something that prior to this you would be willing to kill for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What are you willing to let go of and say, I don't need that anymore? Who could you walk away from? And why would you not walk away? In the world of the infinite, you can leave everything and have anything. Or you can leave anything and have everything. In a world of memory, we pick. Did you know that you pick your memories? I've said all this profound things. I'm going to say it's profound, because I'm making this up. It's profound right now, but I can say something absolutely vile in this moment. I could get under your skin. and say some dreadful things. But you have the opportunity to remember the 10 seconds of profanity or the 20 minutes of profoundity. I just made up another word. I didn't actually make that word up. But somebody I know did. You do that. You get to choose. And I think many of us are afraid to do this. We are afraid to choose again. We are afraid to love again. We are afraid to love more than we are. We are afraid to know infinitely who we are. We kind of like some things that we've experienced already. Some of them we want to experience again. Every moment, a brand new opportunity for unlimited possibilities. Every person you meet has the potential to show you something about yourself that you would not have known had you not had that divine encounter, that God encounter. Is it accidental? Is it serendipitous? Is there some divine intelligence, some logos orchestrating who you walk and run into at a grocery store, who you drive by? This romantic occurrence, this romantic happening. I love to play with people about romance and love because we get stuck there really good. We get stuck. We see somebody that just knocks our socks off. We feel alive. We feel brilliant. We feel sexy. We feel beautiful. We feel limitless. This person has awakened us to something that we didn't know we could experience. We had heard about it. We had hoped about it. But we didn't know it was real until it actually happened. And when it happens, we want to keep it. We don't tell ourselves that we didn't plan it. We didn't plan it. We didn't know we were going to go to Milwaukee that day and meet somebody that we didn't know existed. But it happened. And we're happy. But we might walk into another place and meet somebody else that we didn't know was going to be there. And then we want to say, I can't have this beautiful experience anymore because I had another one already. And there couldn't possibly be anything better than that. And I'm afraid to tell the person who I told I had my best experience with that I've had a better experience with somebody else. Because I'm afraid they're not going to believe it. I'm afraid they're not going to trust it. From a religious perspective, those of us who are Christians and Jesus followers, we are afraid to believe that somebody could be better than Jesus. As if Jesus would be upset by being exceeded. How ludicrous is that? Why would only a God with an ego would be afraid of being improved upon? But who would, in their right mind, choose the inferior God? Why would you do that for the sake of loyalty? Why would you turn a graven image or turn an incorruptible God into a corruptible God? Why do we fancy this need to stop learning and seeing more about ourselves? Do you have the power to walk away? Do you have the faith to walk away? To walk into something beyond what you could even imagine? Guess what? You haven't seen a love that is incapable of being exceeded. You haven't experienced one. It's all, I don't even want to say that word.
Say it.
Trumpable, because I don't want to say that word Trump.
I know who you voted for. I thought it was Ben.
Now you're a real winner.
Oh my God. I don't want to make America great again.
I'm teasing.
I know, it was funny. I set myself over there. Because I don't want to, only thing I want to do again is be born.
Wow.
But I don't want to make it like it was. Never make love like it was. Live again, then breathe again. Never make it like it was. Don't try it. It's blasphemous. It's witchcraft.
Wow.
It's sorcery. I got 10 minutes. No, I don't. I had 10 minutes 3 minutes ago. Kathy left.
She in here, you got 10.
So,
You can have 10 more. No bells rung for you.
but what I want to do, I may have said some things that spark interest. Let's take 7 minutes to talk. Questions? Comments? I'm just that good. I just solved it all. Y'all can go home now. Y'all don't need nobody else.
Seems like I remember one time doing a research on the word memory in scripture, and it was equal to grave. But I don't remember where that was at. It was in Strong's.
Well, Mark's gonna find that out for sure. I promise.
Memory. It was like the root on it was grave.
In that scenario, really, we have memories are powerful. Once you understand, yes, how powerful memories are, and we pick them. The tendency, the magnetism of things that are negative and dark it's hostile. It's very aggressive. And sometimes when we land on dark, negative memories, things that have violated our sense of self, we tend to give these memories more value. Even when we attach to love, we're still like romance, we're still attaching to the fear of losing. These things grip us, and they are terrific. They're terrible. They're terrorizing. I can't emphasize enough how important it is for you to know and remember that you pick your memories. You pick the spot you land on. If I offend you, I have not only offended you. I have not only offended you. It's up to you to determine whether that offense has more value than the edification. And what you choose to grow and what you choose to nurture. If we were to take time to nurture even the moments of love, even in the moment of betrayal, the moment of betrayal doesn't continue except in our memories.
Wow.
I'm not saying that you haven't been betrayed, but you have not been only betrayed. And to infinitely know yourself is to give yourself permission to rise above and beyond any limitation.
Hallelujah.
Even any past joy, it can be exceeded. Any trespass can be overthrown. Your capacity to love is limitless. And when you're challenged to not believe this, love anyway.
Yes.
Find that seat of your soul that allows you to lift, to create, to make. Last night I saw a colleague of mine, a performing colleague, and this person has never been to one of my shows. And she's good. I've been to several of hers. What? Hi,
Get my bell out. We're gonna hide that bell.
And so
It's moving.
she said, yeah, she said, you're really good about coming out. She said, I get so busy. I said, sometimes you just have to make time. I said, I do. I make time. And I meant it literally. We are more powerful than we have imagined. Your imagination is infinite. Your capacity in this life is imminent. You were born into this world. You have an experience of humanity, but it is not the only experience you may have. The truth is, you process everything through your humanity. You don't think like a dog. You don't think like a horse. And contrary to what animal pet owners think, their dogs and cats don't think like humans. They don't. They cannot. They are not. We can imagine ourselves to be birds, or as Mike said, to pull on the testicles and to go whatever the myth said. We can imagine ourselves to be playing with a donkey or whatever. We can be like Solomon and have a woman's breast like pomegranates. But nobody's trying to go and grab a pomegranate for real. Not for that reason. I mean, some people may. They want to. I'm cool with that. But not only that. So, I got 60 seconds, 120 seconds.
Sure.
I did not use 5 minutes that quick.
You have 3.
Make some time, would you?
I'm gonna make some time right now. I'm making
some
sure.
more time.
I'm making some time. Captain, make time for me.
So you were saying there about memory and the power to choose, right? That's really the power to choose. That's the power of our choice.
Right,
That's when we're empowered. And
right.
that's really what you're focusing on is to, in order to change where you are now. You're gonna have to choose what you give your power to.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I like that. Summed up in, I could have been done
That's
like
what she does.
58 minutes ago.
Yeah, she knows.
She made the time for you.
She made time for me? She just
She redeemed it and compacted it.
Mark,
Yes.
He's next.
I got 60 seconds I can hold on to. I can just hold this mic. I want to hold this mic and
That's
say
what you
nothing.
want to do, Martha.
Thank you all.
The things that we need to understand is that, you know, we've had 2 presentations here that is like you're in college. And, but we have to understand that love transcends everything. And that when you really understand love, it's not that you learn love and then learn something else. It's that love is the very fiber of your being. I want to make things kind of go in a different direction to a degree. Not really, but somewhat. When I thought about Marquis's presentation, I thought about Albert Einstein said imagination is greater than knowledge. The guys who did what they did with the DNA began by playing with building blocks. There is a part of us that is an imagination. And we must understand that above our knowledge and above our memories, the scripture does say, you shall hear him in the grave. And grave there in the Strong's is linked to the idea of you shall remember in the grave. So that's where you get that root that you shall remember in the grave. Memory is a very powerful thing. I remember years ago reading the book of Proverbs that said that you shall have a blessed memory. And I thought, well, most of what I know of my background was not a blessing. There's some new people here, so I'm going to say a couple things about my background. I grew up a Baptist Costas. I am from Arkansas, so I'm a full-blown hillbilly. So I speak Hybbilian, okay? I don't speak English. It is my 4th language. I do Greek, Hebrew, and some little bit of everything.
Sanskrit down there.
But I want to talk about the divine dance. A few years ago, there was a book called The Shack that came out by Paul Young. And that book was a revolution to theology because it revealed that God is not an old-haired white man. It even challenged that God is not a white-haired old man that can't hear anything. And out of that came through this Greek word. If you don't mind, Mike, I'll write over this. This Greek word called the perichoresis, which is the divine dance. And one of the things that I want to do is engage your imagination in a dance that you've never had, or a dance that you're going to create time for. Because our greatest hindrance to love is the concepts that we bring to it. So you have this Greek word, the perichoresis, peri meaning to surround or to encompass, and then this is the word choresis, which we get the English word choir. So it's a choreographical dance on all different levels. This was the purpose of the love of God. For years, I had an image of love that is comfortable, that fit my theological box. Now, I didn't begin there. I gave my life to God in a Assembly of God church when I was very, very young, and I experienced a love. It was such a divine love that it is not unconditional love. It was a love that never was conditioned. It can flow through anything and still remain of the reality and substance of that which it is. And then my struggle began with this desire. I never told anybody this experience, but I had a love that I knew existed. And I went to my fathers and the Pentecostals and the Baptists and all of this. Well, at 14 years old, I ate too much pizza or something. In the middle of the night, I said, I am called to the ministry. Woke up the next day and I said, you've got to be kidding me. And then my struggle with this book began. Because the God that I had experienced is nothing like the God I heard about in church. And I only went to the church I went to. I picked that church, just like I picked my memories, because it had good music. Not because nobody knew anything. But I went to this church, and I grew up King James only. In fact, I was in Fred yesterday, and I found the King James large print Bible. That was the only Bible you could have as a Pentecostal. You couldn't buy a Bible from the Bible bookstore because they sold the Devil's Versions, which is the NIV, the American Standard, and any other satanic translation. In the Pentecostals, it was worse to have a NIV than it was to have a satanic Bible, because in a satanic Bible, at least you knew you were trying to read it so you'd be not exposed to the lies. So then somebody mentioned the word Moffat, and I thought, who had the audacity to write a translation? And I began to hear about Greek and Hebrew. And I want to give you a few definitions here. The word love is the word that comes from three words in Hebrew. You have this word ab, which we get the word abba. And it is the sound that a child makes to its father. Actually, it's the coo. You also have this word, which is the word hesed. Oftentimes you'll see a ch. And that is the divine love that is in momentum to change, not to change you, but to embrace you. And then you have this other word that is the word chana, which is God's zeal towards you. Those are the three Hebrew words. Then you have this Greek word, agape, which was the word used in the ancient world when people would see a painting that is so beautiful and so precious that there was no value to it. And all through the Gospels, you see this. You see hesed, and you see all these different Greek words that Jesus would use. For instance, he would say to Peter, do you agape me, or do you phileo me? Because it took multiple words to express the Hebrew thought. Now, when this dance in the shack began to happen, by the way, that word chana means God's zeal and kindness toward us. When we begin to look at this, Now we begin to have some challenging. Well, I did some studies in Aramaic, and I want to give you some other words. One of the Hebrew words, the Aramaic words, I'm so used to saying that. Let me see. I'll put perichoresis a little later. By the way, Greek scholars say that's not in the Bible. That tells me they don't know their Greek. But it's in the New Testament. But here's this word, and if anybody knows a certain rock band, you probably know what that word is. It's the word huba. Huba is the Aramaic word for love, and there is actually a band that is called Hubastan. It's Aramaic. But we'll take this off here. I don't know nobody know how to listen to that. That's the devil's. Anyways. So huba, this word was a word that meant the idea of fire or heat, to be white hot with intensity, passion, totality. It is the Aramaic equivalent to the word hesed. So this word here connects to this word, which is divine momentum. Then you have the word hana, which is the Aramaic version. By the way, Hebrew and Aramaic are very close to each other. And I'll explain that a little later, but that is the word. And then you have this other word, and here's what will throw you. This right here is what's called Eastern Syriac. Then you come across, somebody gonna come through and go, what?
I can't read that.
All right.
Eastern Syria.
It's just Eastern Syriac. Just mainly contact to this. But in certain circles, you have Western, which spells it Karuba. Now, this is real confusing about Aramaic because Aramaic is not trying to give you a different thought than the Hebrew. It's giving you multiple ways to express the Hebrew thought. And when you begin to look at these words, there's another word, and this word has caused me some controversy. Let me go here. Thank God it's on video. And you have this word, which is rakma, and there are ramatha. You have some of these. These are the Aramaic words for love. This comes from the, and I can't even read this, the Compendious Syriac Dictionary. Well, I have a friend of mine who knows Aramaic. And I was talking to him about a year or so ago. And I had done some studies in what's called mimetic. And he mentioned this book called Desire Found Me by Andre Ray. This is actually a companion of the Francis du Toit who wrote the Mirror translation. And what really hit me about this was a French philosopher that did not know Hebrew, did not know Greek, but just was honest about what he said the Bible says it was. And he explained how in the ancient world, and I understand when I say ancients, I mean there is some talks about the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Sumerians, the ancient Sanskrit, but then you have to understand that after a point of time, most of the known world, because Alexander Great, gave into what's called Greek thought. So when that time happened, you had certain Hebrew words, and let me tell you, Hebrew is not a language. You would have symbols, okay? That's Yahweh or Yahweh. There's no vowel points in it. When the book of Daniel, when they went into captivity, they took Aramaic and created vowel points. So the Aramaic, because you have to understand, and don't be offended when I say this, I'll find that later. Many Jewish rabbis changed the Hebrew. So because we can't go and get our hands on the original Hebrew, which we can, but we've been told we can't, a lot of times then your metaphysical unity churches will go through the Aramaic to give hint to what's in the original Hebrew. And for years, you cannot find hardly anyone on this planet a tribe of people who still speaks the ancient Hebrew. You can the Aramaic. There's actually tribes in other parts of the world that speaks the same Aramaic that they believe was the original Gospels. Now, people come in, do you think it's this or that? I say it's both. Because it depends on where you were in the country. For instance, I could go to New York and talk to them, and though I'm speaking English, they wouldn't understand a word I said. Because they'd say, you want to? What? You want to? They wouldn't understand that, even though I'm, speaking supposedly English. I'm speaking Hebrew. That's what I'm speaking. But we have to understand that in the etymologies, and I love engaging the imagination, that we start creating our own vocabularies, that we start feeling things that we can't put into the words that we've been ordered to talk about. Because we are moving into a place of consciousness in which words, that's one reason I study multiple words, because I'm not necessarily trying to find one particular word. I'm trying to say that in these different words is multiple expressions of one thought. Now, I'm going to say something to you, and I know that Mike talked about the different stages of myth. The word mythos in Greek is a true narrative, but here's the word that they don't tell you. And this is from Spiros Zodhiates, okay? He's what's called a interdenominational Baptist, because he got thrown out of the Southern Baptist Party because he wrote a book on divorce. And there's a bunch of them that didn't like the fact that he didn't condone a translation that hated women. So, Zodhiates says the word mythos comes from a word mua, which means to initiate. It means to initiate in the mysteries. So we're not talking about somebody coming up with a story out of nowhere. No, these stories came from years and years of initiation, and it doesn't matter what the story's context is. What is the meaning behind the story? For instance, I know that there are people in Arkansas that cook turkeys, and they saw the back half of the turkey off. And they've done it for years and had great families. Nobody ever studied the fact that the original turkey that had been handed down was in a small stove, and they couldn't afford to put the whole turkey in there, so they cut part of it off. So we're living with limitations that's been put onto us because of years and years. However, there's a negative side to that, but there's also a positive side, because you have a story. And the number one thing that I was told, years ago I did some work with Native Americans, he said the number one thing that government says, if you can remove the identity of a people, you can remove, if you can remove their language, you can remove their identity.
Exactly.
Even your modern day Cherokee translation of the Bible is written in Old Cherokee, and it was conformed to the King James language. There's some guys now actually writing the new one, because Cherokee is a form of ancient Aramaic. And see, you have to take it out of the hands of the religious, because they ain't going to put the words in there they ain't supposed to. And the Cherokee people are offended because they put words in there that was never part of their tribe or their tradition. People ask me, Mark, are you a student of comparative religion? No, I am not. I am a student of words, but yet I believe, as Gary Sigler says, the Christ is the seed in every man. So I'm not here trying to condone comparative religion. I'm trying to compare the Christ in every man that has had its expressions in every religion. Are you interfaith? No, I'm the faith. Because I believe that every person comes into things because of the faith. Of course, then you say, well, how do you define faith? That's another lesson. So, and I'm going to make a contradiction. I'm going to make a statement. The Bible, what it says about the law, is contradictive based on where you are in the text. If you take one definition and try to form a definition of law, and you don't know where you are contextually, it will contradict itself if you're really truthful. People have said, what definition you have of myth? All of them. It depends on where you are in the biblical text. Because these men saw what they saw based on a turkey. And whether you realize it or not, I'm going to unhook stuff.
Yeah, you are.
Whether you realize it or not, We suffer from versititis.
Mm-hmm.
Or, let me say this, we're verse damned. Because we take one verse out of context, build a whole religion on it until somebody comes up with another verse. Now, I heard some of the verses that Mike said, and I'm not going to have any of those in my Bible. They're not in my translation. I'm an NIV or something. You know, I'm going to tell you, if I translated the Hebrew the way it's supposed to, you couldn't even have the Song of Songs. My translation would not be sold in a Christian bookstore.
That's right.
That's right.
It wouldn't be sold in a New Age bookstore either. Because we are realizing now that language is nothing but the place of our concepts. And our greatest hindrance to our concepts is the experience that we're having right now. But we have, well, don't you try to take that away from me. I'm not trying to take nothing away from you. In fact, I tried to years ago. I tried to take your sin away, and you would never let me have it anyway. And I had enough problems of my own trying to get right. I was the most selfish person. I'm going to tell you, till I found grace, I was the most selfish person in the world. Because I would knock you in the head trying to get to that altar getting right. And then one day I got with grace, realized God was never offended, and I thought, who's all these people hell on around? That was a few years ago. Let's look at the Sermon on the Mount. Theologians have debated for years whether that's Old or New Covenant. The Sermon on the Mount. And yet half of the translations, I used to hate the Sermon on the Mount because it said, blessed are the poor in spirit, and I was from the prosperity gospel movement. You know, I'm Word of Faith, by the way. That's where I went when I was 14 years old. And to continue that story, I would have never got called in the ministry, but the love I've experienced as a child come back, so love was my identity, not my religion. So I got started, rubbing my roots, Kenneth Hagin, Kenneth Copeland. I was from Fayetteville, Arkansas, and so I started out years ago, and people started talking Hebrew and Greek, and that began to challenge me because it made me think. I couldn't think in English, just ask my wife. But in the Sermon on the Mount, it said, blessed are the poor in spirit. Well, I rebuked that in the name of Jesus. But you know, he's quoting Hebrew. You know what it really says in Hebrew? Blessed, not going to be blessed, you already blessed, are the humble in spirit. You're not going to ever get blessed in the future. Actually, there's two different Hebrew words there. One word is the word barak, and everybody's saying it's part of Obama's name, which means I create, I bless, therefore I create. Or you have the other word, which is used in those Gospels, which means you are already blessed. No one can make you blessed, you are already blessed. Somebody said, I jumped in on a T.D. Jakes sermon somehow. So let's look at the Sermon on the Mount. All these, and this is one of the hardest things because when you're in the Sermon on the Mount, the Torah looks like it's instructions rather than regulations. And what happens is you go into the Sermon on the Mount and you think it's all about ethics, and yet theologians have debated, was Jesus introducing something new or was he improving on something old? And I say this, yes and no. Because I understand that where they were at that time, they had veiled understandings. We have to understand that the culture in which Jesus emerged was a Middle Eastern culture which was more of a parabolictic or paradoxical. They told stories. And we read that we take the Beatitudes, take them apart, and turn them into some sort of Hallmark card, rather than understanding it's not talking about an identity that you're going to have, it's talking about an identity that you are, but once you know that identity, everything changes. But then you go over to Paul, and you think, well, Paul's lost his mind, he didn't even know who Jesus was. And you read all these statements about Paul, because Paul, in his talks, sometimes when he talks the word law, and here's our problem. You have this word Torah, which is the idea of a glyph that is portrayed on the screen. If I had a projector and projected on the screen, and the Greeks come around and they come up with this word nomos, which according to Hal Ketcherside means the controlling principle. We reduced everything of the multi-dimensional understanding. You understand that in the feast there were 3 dimensions. You understand that in the tabernacle there were 3 dimensions. And yet we reduce everything to a one-dimensional law in which we think everybody in the world is going to allude to. And so we read Paul as if he's trying to talk about one law, and then somebody had the audacity to say it means to demand. God has never demanded anything.
Come on now.
In fact, I will be honest to tell you that there are certain things I don't think God knows because He creates them. Why would you have to know something if you create what you want to? But we have this image, we have this mentality that when we pray to God, we're giving Him some kind of instruction. It's like He don't know.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is, He don't know because He don't have to know because He is everything and He creates it. Well, God lives in the past, present, future. No, He lives outside of time, and all your memories and your biology is connected to time. So we're asking, what do you think the future holds? I don't know, create it. Oh, Mark, that sounds like blasphemy. No, that's me doing by my identity what I'm told to do, because this whole book is not written about a future event or a past event. It's talking about a living present now, and it's not just present truth, it's present experience. And the problem is when our experiences don't line up with what we think is present truth, then we start trying to break everything down. Do I agree with Rudolph Bultmann? If I understood, and people didn't know what he was trying to say anyway. You know, when I've been told what people think and then I read what they actually said, I realize that that was somebody trying to put concepts. Just like my wife, she just gave me a concept. No, I'm very thankful for my wife. Y'all be here. I could bury your Greek and Hebrew. Thank God for my wife helping me. Let's look at the word lawlessness. I mean, after all, Jesus said, "Depart from me, you workers of iniquity." I said, boy, I don't want none of that. I know what iniquity was. I didn't have the sense to look it up in the Strong's, but I went through years. I hope I ain't got no iniquity. I didn't know what it was.
No iniquity.
But when you look at the word, what does it mean? There are more than one Greek word translated iniquity. But we're not told that. It's this word, dikos. By the way, the word dike means justice. See, the English dictionary goes off in your head when I say so. Then you have this word, anomia, which means anti-law, or the opposite of law. Both words translated lawlessness, both words translated iniquity, and remember, I don't know what that is. What does that mean? That means that there is a sense of justice and a sense of the law of my being that you do not understand, and because you're ignorant, then you completely, all the time, separate yourself from God in your mind. In the book of Isaiah, it says, your sin and your iniquity has separated you from God. It didn't say God did it, it said you did it. I did it a long time. So then you come into these other words. Now let's just say this about the word logos. We think that in our mentality that God's in the heavens saying, boy, I'm fixing to send my logos.
Come on now.
God don't speak Greek. What we have done is lock stuff into time that was never to be locked in time. The feast completely changed. There were 3 levels of Passover, 3 levels of feast, which meant that everything we know as God's timetable changed. And we've locked it down in the time and says, now I want you to conform to my view of time. And if I got you locked in my view of time, I sure can lock you into what I think of as love.
Come on now.
I remember going up to an altar, and they told me, listen, you need to go up to this altar, because if you die tonight, what does that have to do with time? So guess who birthed my salvation? Death. My fear of death, my threat of death. Wasn't the love of God. In fact, I didn't know all that was coming. In fact, I messed up my first altar call. I didn't even know how to do it. did it wrong and then I made other people do it. Even though I had had an experience that said there's something more to this than us just agreeing with time and death. But these things that we're talking to you are very static. That's what the etymology of the word law means, to lay down and make static. So we're asking you to look at things from a different angle. Rene Girard talks about mimesis. And here's what I see. In the ancient world, up before the time of Daniel, what did you have? You have years and years and years of people doing ancient cultures, the sacred, the profane, the secular, all this going on. And then what happens? Man alters the language. So you got this big, gigantic volcano. We don't know what to call that, but we got to appease that God. So we decided to find out all the tribes, get them together. This is the weakest tribe, so we're going to throw them in the volcano, and it was called scapegoating. And that was a part of culture to scapegoat the weakest tribe so that we could appease this God. Do you know that got weaved into our theology? And Catholicism nailed it down, and so now I'm looking for someone to go, and I've said this before and I get in trouble. We've created a theology where God beats the hell out of Jesus so he won't beat the hell out of you and then send you to an eternal torture chamber forever. That's what our theology created. But mimic, what was interesting is, do I agree with mimic theory? I think he didn't understand pure Hebrew. I think he didn't understand the ancients. But I do understand that we have now weaved into our language this threat and fear. And you can go to church and you hear so much about death, so much about time, so much about these things, and not the life and the law and the thing that you are, which is your divinity. And then when we do hear about this, what happens? Every fear I've ever had. Talk about picking your memories. But I had some good memories of me as a sinner, because that's all I thought about all them years in church. Oh God, there I did again. Oh, I thought about it again. No, I did again. Oh, okay. And I repented and went through the whole deal. And we called that prayer.
Yes.
Exactly.
And then when we finally were so exhausted, we had a good thought about ourselves, we called that breaking through. And then we saw, and the whole world knew we were okay.
No one knew it was okay.
Did it get rid of anything? No. I walked outside, looked at a hot woman, and I had to go back and start over. But service wasn't until next week, and that's when you met God. Now, I know that sounds so crazy. That's what I did. And then, when I finally began to read the Bible through a different lens, I said, now wait a minute. Wait a minute. The old covenant was my commitment to God, my vow to God. The new covenant's God's vow to me. Do you know half of the world that has preached the hellfire and brimstone God perfectly lines up with what is taught in Islam today? But them people are terrorists. What do you think we've done to people's minds? We ain't shot them, but we terrorized the fire out of them. We call it Pentecostal preaching. Now, I'm not against flowing. You'll see me flow, and I believe in flowing. I thank God for that. Amen. There was both good and bad. I thank God my emotions were released, because I'd have went nuts. If it wasn't for my wife and her metaphysical side, y'all be visiting me in an institution today. Yeah, he knows Greek and Hebrew, and he's crazy. Have you ever noticed when you go into a mental institute and they think they blaspheme the Holy Spirit? It's never the Quran, it's never Buddha, never Yoga Sutras, it's a King James Bible. Yeah. Yep, I'm absolute. I don't know God, but I'm absolutely know I blew it. How? Well, and they quote you 20 verses. They know all them verses in Ezekiel you talked about. So now I'm sitting here understanding after years of all these linguistics, which undid so much for me. Now I'm looking at Aramaic and I'm going, oh my gosh, there's no way what we know of a Christianity could ever sit down with an Islam and have peace. But if we understood the Hebrew roots, if we understood the true meaning of the words. And listen, when I say linguistics, I'm not just talking about original languages. I see you, some of you in this room, y'all are linguistics in English. I'm not. I have poor English. But I think there's something about a divinely fitted word in season that can alter the way people think. And we have so strapped this. For years, I tried to make things fit based on my view of time. When I got rid of time, then all of a sudden, I realized that half of what I was calling finished or unfinished was based on my view of time. So, now I've come to a knowing that says, God did not have to do anything, but He chose to. And I have within my being the ability to choose again, the ability to release an imagination. And listen, what's so crazy is the very thing I was told was the greatest sin in the world, which was an imaginative mind, has become the workshop of creating a whole new life. And I get to walk into places, in places that I used to be here, and watch people backed against the wall and tell them, you can do your own research, you can do your own study, and listen, once you get going, you can't stop. And I tell you, I have a real problem with what you preach. I double dog dare you, that's Hibbilian, to go in there and search it for yourself. And if it causes you to study and dig, then I'm good. I've done my place. I don't want you to agree with me, because by the time I give an opinion, it gets changed. Because I'm out of my box. I'm out of concepts. Mike, they just missed it. Mark was missed. Here I go again. Thank God for that.
Yes.
Because I used to be in deliverance ministry. You know what that meant?
Oh, yeah.
I kept changing the name of the box. You know, I went from demon to illusion to ghost to, then they said, we want to do paranormal. Well, let's do that. Release ghosts. They said, we're going to do ancient aliens. I said, I'm out. Y'all, I'm done. I'm wore out. I can't get rid of them spirits. You have a question?
Yeah, I did. I do. I wanted you to clarify God does not need to know what God creates. Give me I want some traction with that if you could give it to me. I thought it was kind of funny when you said Christianity will never be able to be with Islam and have peace, because linguistically it says Christianity would never be with the way of peace and no peace. Because that's what Islam means, the way of peace.
Well, it's interesting because I'm reading a book by a guy that was not Dr. Jeffrey Seif. He was trained at SMU. He was mentored by Zola Levitt. And he talks about when you go back to the Hebrew and Hebrew roots, how it is so similar to the culture. But most of Christianity don't even have nothing to do with Hebrew. In fact, they cancel Hebrew as even a doctrine. But then this other guy, he come from, was a Muslim, and he actually went and got theological degrees so he could compare them. And they're sitting down in a conversation, and the guy's like, you can't tell me that's in the Hebrew. Are you serious? That's the Muslim. And the other guy that's from Islam's going, man, I didn't know that was in the Hebrew. And the guy's looking going, I didn't know that was in the Quran. Now, I'm not here trying to tell you to read the Quran. I got no problems with my King James and my translations of my own. But I'm telling you, the problem that I have, most of all, but what I say about Christianity, is of the Christians. I don't have nobody in Buddha writing letters and emails to me. It's other people, I can't believe you defined that word. But to say what you said, I think that we have this mentality that God knows the future, therefore He creates. But if God lives in the now, He doesn't have to create. He doesn't have to have a future to know it. He creates it. So God doesn't even have the memory of that which He just created, because He doesn't need one. We have built a memory. Oh, look at what God did. Look at what God did. And miss the whole point of what God's doing.
Exactly.
Because if God was ever here and He went there, there wouldn't exist anymore. So God doesn't have to know what He creates because He's the creator.
And because there is the inevitable synthesis of God agreeing with itself.
It's an automatic law of being.
Right.
That God's, and that's what we're saying, the laws was not a set law in stone because it was based on the timetables, the calendar in which he set up, which is at times was a sun calendar and sometimes was a moon calendar. So you have a lot of these calendars because people always debate with me, and then I'll get back to that statement, the audacity of this statement. And I understand where they come from because I used to think just like them. So I never criticized a lot of people because I was just like them at one point. But you have two Greek words for time, kairos and chronos. Well, our Greek scholars tell us that kairos is the now moment, and chronos is the word for man's view of time. But that's not true. That's people that don't know their Hebrew, because the times and seasons was set up by who? God. So all the time of the Feast and Tabernacles was the chronos and the kairos, and the two have to marry. So you have to understand that God doesn't have to chronologically tell time or even know what he creates, because he can only create that which is himself. That's the whole point of emanation. God can only create that which he is. And so we have this thing of, oh, if I don't inform God and he don't move, God doesn't have to move because he creates. He doesn't have to make something happen in time because he is that which moves time. Now you say, well, Mark, this is semantics. Not really, because what happens when we're under pressure, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, we still tell love, you're not good enough.
Exactly.
You're not big enough. Yeah, you know what? It's a finished work for you, but it ain't a finished work for him. I have neighbors that are Middle Eastern, which means they're college kids, so they're from that schedule. They stay up all night long. And listen, I can sit here and tell you all of these crazy things, but I can tell you that I am creating time and space for them because I'm understanding we have a culture, and these people are not doing anything but what they come to America. What do? You go to college and you party and you do this, and then you go back home, and you know they're destined to go back home. And I'm sitting there in my comfort zone going, why do they got to act that way? And the whole time God's challenging me, saying, this is happening not so you can put something in time or you can have a memory, but because love is now, and that's what I've got to learn. And you know what's really hard? I work a job and I'm on a strict clock. And they don't care nothing about it. In fact, I tell you, and this is no lie, this has happened to me metaphysically. Since time changed in Texas, I've been on the other clock. So it's like my brain's on one clock, this clock's on the other, and I could say that I have an eternal clock, but that's not true either. What I have is a clock that doesn't live in time, that I have to constantly battle, because my concept of time is love hasn't done it. It's got to be done now. And it's all just interpretations. But when you walk in that door and you meet somebody, you know instantly, I don't care what your theology, that love is here and love is now. And you're in that now moment. Athletics talk about it all the time, and it's like, man, I can't believe how it all worked out in that moment. And then they go home after 20 million pictures, and oh, that was so awesome. That's the best layup I ever saw you do. That was awesome. And they're sitting, oh, I don't know what happened. They got into a place where love transcends time. That has nothing to do with law, by the way. I didn't get to my notes, but I don't care. Y'all pulling things out of me. And that's what I love. If I minister, you know, I've been to places where there's 500 people and they ain't got no pull. And I'm up there just spouting my word. But y'all are pulling things out of me. And I love it. That's why I do what I do.